this new episode of FOREVERNESS. We are very excited today to come with us with Mr. Paco Calvo. Paco is a professor of philosophy at the University of Murcia and director of the MINT lab, the Minimal Intelligence Lab. And Paco has a extensive background in plant cognition. His book Plantasapiens has been acclaimed by news like The Guardian or the New York Times, and has been translated to how many languages so
It's
far?
like 10 or 12 and counting. Just came out in Chinese and now it's coming out in Korean, so it's doing well.
Awesome. So you get a picture of the impact of this book. Quite interesting about plant cognition, and yeah, such a pleasure, Paco. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
No, thanks
Um,
for having me. It's a pleasure.
thank you. So, what was when were you first interested in this topic in plant intelligence, so to speak?
So you mean to say, when did I go mad, right?
Yeah, when that
when
happened, when that
when
clicked.
did this all started, right?
What were you
Yeah.
doing at the moment?
Yeah, well, once upon a time, actually, I should say that once upon a time, I was a straight philosopher, right? I
Uh-huh.
used to do philosophy as in real armchair philosophy, which is the type of philosophy people, use when they say, no, we are doing like hard thinking, no, like conceptual analysis, that sort of thing. And for some reason, which I really don't know which was the true reason, eventually I got, I guess, a little bit disconnected, or should I say disappointed, with the way the discussion of intelligence was being pursued from within philosophy, right? It was everything like far too abstract, and we needed to touch ground, right? And to me, touching ground meant going for the real thing, like life patterns of behavior that are complex enough, and yet we might disregard them and or turn the blind eye to their capacities. We might look, I mean, plants, they have no neurons, they have no brains. How come? I mean, it makes no sense, the very question of whether they're intelligent or not, right? So those are the examples that I was interested in, precisely because they were defying our preconceptions, right?
Mhm.
And that was a long time ago. That was like starting to work in plants, that took place like 2005. Yeah, 20 years actually, 20 years, 2 decades now. But long story. I had done a few other things, so I'm not sure how much you want to know about it.
No, it's just how come the idea of saying, okay, actually plants
Mm,
maybe intelligent may have
yeah. Yeah,
maybe.
well, yeah, I see what you. Well, the truth is that my main interest at that time was in, of course, like as a philosopher, as a straight philosopher, was in human intelligence. I wanted to understand the human mind, right? And this was to me the hinge, the hunch was like, hey, hold on a sec. We are far too used to thinking of ourselves by looking at whoever is closer to us, like primates
Mhm.
or mammals, because they have a neocortex, like all mammalian brains. Like I mean, like thinking, okay, let's try to find out about ourselves but observing what is it that these other guys that are sufficiently close to us can tell us about our doings, right? Sort of. And I was dissatisfied with that approach, because I was thinking, hey, maybe we are far too, maybe no, we are certainly too obsessed with ourselves. Like, why do we think that to understand intelligence in capital letters, what we actually do is what counts, or the only thing that counts, right? So to me, it was like, why don't we go the other way around? Why don't we check those guys that don't look like us at all, the most dissimilar, and let's see how much we share? Because if we still share something, if there is something, I like to say, something that unites us all, the tree of life. So
Mhm.
think of the tree of life as such, from
Mhm.
unicellulars to us, like all forms of life, right, that have ever existed on planet Earth, right? So my question was, is there something that we all share that unites us all? And if so, then we can start to discard things that might be contingent, not necessary. Like, imagine you say, hey, a bacteria, unicellulars. Oh, these guys might be doing fancy things. They might not be that stupid after all. And yet, it's not that they don't have a neocortex, it's that they don't have anything other than a single cell, right? So you might say, hey, hold on a sec. If these guys are doing all these amazing things and they don't have any of these prerequisites that we thought were absolutely needed, then we might need to rethink everything root and branch.
It's
And plants were to me the perfect example because they are somewhere in the middle. They are multicellular, they're eukaryotes, they do very sophisticated things. And what we had to do was to train our mind and our eye to see them, because we think they are sitting there doing nothing. And as soon as you start time lapsing them, you start to be amazed. Oh, wow, it's amazing all the stuff they do. They don't locomote, they grow, they don't have neurons. Well, they must have some other tissue that they use to do their daily routines. You see? So let's check out what these other guys can do, and then let's rethink what we understand by human intelligence. Maybe we are not that special. That's to me the great message.
after all. Yeah, I saw a conference that you were giving
Mm.
on YouTube. I saw, and you mentioned a very interesting concept that makes you double think again about your preconceptions, which is like we are the Ptolemies of our era, maybe, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for bringing that. That's one of my obsessions. Look, I don't like to do spoilers about the book about Planta Sapiens, but
Yeah,
this is just in the epilogue. This is at the very end of the book. So just one tiny spoiler, because that has to do with what you just said, education. I'm obsessed with education because I think we are doing a disfavor by educating our kids not to think different, not to think outside the box, right? And it's funny because when this thing you mentioned, I think that this is what I was telling this audience. Like, um, it's so funny to to laugh or to make a caricature, to think it's like a silly thing. What we already know is wrong. Like you say, oh man, for God's sake, Ptolomeo, how could these guys think that the Earth was at the center and everything was revolving around the Earth? Right? That's a stupid. Hold on a sec. Stupid? How you mean that's stupid? Stupid from your vantage perspective. I mean, we were born seeing planet Earth from a picture taken from the outside, right? So we were born, we were educated into seeing this blue marble. So imagine you are in the blue marble and you don't see it. Nobody took a picture from the outside, right? So what do you mean these guys were stupid? They were doing the best astronomy they were capable of. In fact, it was amazing astronomy. Ptolemean astronomy was great. They had the best model at the time to deal with, to account for all these irregularities they were observing to the naked eye, like planetary movements, the phases of Venus, the moon, whatever, anything going on. Oh, they were tweaking their model, making little adjustments to make everything fit, right? The model and the observations, they were gathering and gathering and gathering more and more observations, right? So to me, that's not the case, because that's the history of science, right? That's not what's interesting. To me, it's not to think of Ptolemy, but to think of his students. So if you're a student of Ptolemy in those days, a few centuries back, right, and you learn by heart what he was telling you get the best marks in your exam. You get an A plus. Why?
correct.
You can just be a great student of a wrong theory that at the time is the best that you have. So my question for 2025 is, hold on a sec, what will the future generations 100 years from now, like in 2000 and 21, 25, 100 years from now, what will they be laughing at of what we take for granted,
Correct. It's like
right?
we're gonna be like farther out the cavern, so to speak, the cavern of knowledge.
Absolutely.
We tend to think that we always came out of the cavern or whatever, and we see the reality now, and we made the new discoveries,
Yeah,
and the maybe so incomplete after
sure.
10, 20 years, 30 years, whatever.
To
So
me, the most important lesson is that we shouldn't take anything for granted.
mhm, mhm.
I mean, and that there are no ideas that are not worth exploring. I mean, let's think bold. let's think bold, however wild that might sound at first sight. Not because you know that, the problem is not that you know that by thinking bold, you are right. No, you might still be wrong.
Hmm.
But even if the orthodox explanation is the correct one, even if it was the correct one, you still don't know it until you have discarded the alternative explanations. So you must think bold, even if it's to falsify your wild thoughts and go back to orthodoxy. So one way
Absolutely.
or another, you need to think different.
Or find something in the middle, no? Which is
Sure,
always
sure, sure. Oh,
we are
that's for
we are
sure.
never 100% correct.
Oh no, sure. Some gray in between, neither black nor white. That's for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think here we are in the right room for that. I think both parties we tend to we tend to do that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad we are on the same page.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I just wanna link with something that you mentioned. Okay, I want to ask you two questions actually. Is there something that actually unites all forms of life from
Hmm,
your point of view? Have you
hmm,
discovered it, or what are your thoughts on that? And if so, what is it for you, and how
hmm.
would you describe that?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great question. Uh, in fact, that's I would say work in progress, right? But there are a couple of lessons I think we can draw. One is that we are far too obsessed with what's happening inside the body.
Hmm.
So as in think, hey, what unites us all has got to be something that we have inside. Like say neurons. Imagine you say intelligence requires neurons, right? And then you find out that plant cells fire as they do, spikes of voltage. So an action potential, you find it in a Venus flytrap, like a Venus flytrap, this the carnivorous plant that you touch the inner hair and it shuts,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this when you touch the inner hair, what fires is an action potential. So the same action potential you find in neurons, right?
Mhm.
So then you might say, hey, hold on a sec. Maybe what unites us all, for example, is bioelectricity, right? It doesn't matter whether it's neural tissue or non-neural tissue, the one trading with bioelectricity. So the spikes of voltage, right? Voltage flowing across an organism for the purpose of orchestrating behaviors, right? Trades in electrophysiological patterns, for example, right? And you might say, well, we learned that that's something that might unite us all, the common currency being electricity, for example. Uh, but I'm not that, although there is some aspects of it that are worth digging in, we've done that as well. I mean, that's why, for example, we, again, not a spoiler, because in the book we get started with this idea of anesthetizing a plant.
Mhm.
We know that when you anesthetize a plant, you are messing up membrane properties of the plant cells. So ions cannot cross the membrane, and then it doesn't depolarize. So you don't get an action potential. It doesn't fire. So we know electricity plays a big deal here, that's for sure. But to me, the most interesting lesson has to do not what's happening within the organism, but outside. And the easiest way to answer the question, what unites us all, is home, sweet home. We all inhabit the same world. So what we share is the yard, the backyard. Why? Because we are all exposed to planetary regularities. So the sun sets and the sun rises for all life. And then you understand that it's not a miracle, that all life forms evolved an adaptation, which is keeping time through circadian clocks. So we can all tell time, right? And then you say, hey, how could they all tell time if they have so differently, so vastly different substrates, different bodies, different everything? Oh, because what counts is not what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of. And we are all inhabiting a world full of information in the form of regular patterns. Oh, things happen on a regular basis. And if things happen on a regular basis, the sun sets, the sun rises, temperature drops, temperature peaks, all these things, relative humidity, you name it. So all the parameters that are constantly fluctuating on a semi-regular pattern, that type of regularities are highly informative, evolutionarily speaking. So you want to know when it's risky to go out for a walk because predators are around. Oh, time to go to bed. You have your circadian clocks that tell you when to do what, right? So you see, what unites us all is the information that we all rely on because we inhabit the same
Would
planet.
you say, Paco, that what unites us all is that we've been subject to the same evolutionary pressure?
Not exactly, because pressures will be different.
Yes,
So
yeah, evolutionary context. Yeah, yes,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
sure. So we'll have different pressures, but at the same time, if so, the thing is that is picking information that is informative, right? For different reasons. So
Mhm.
so to me, it might be informative the fact that hey, time to go to bed. But for another species, it might be the other way around. It might be hey, time to go out and hunt. So it's just the actual regularity. So it's
Mhm.
simply that there are regularities. Things happen on a regular basis. And the question is, what form of life could afford to turn the blind eye to those regularities?
Mhm.
If we lived in a planet full of chaos, no regularities whatsoever to pick, then it would be a miracle that we would be here. We need to rely on patterns. Now, of course, we will make the best out of different patterns depending on our needs, because the needs of plants differ from our needs. They don't flee, they don't hide, they are rooted, they are sessile, which is one of the reasons people think plants are stupid. They say, hey, plants, they are sitting, they are doing nothing, they cannot be intelligent. They don't realize that no, that's not the issue. The issue is that if they are seated, if they are doing nothing in square quotes, that simply means that they don't have to. They don't need to go shopping and cook dinner as you do. Well, they might say, hey, you are the stupid one. You have to go shopping. They do photosynthesis. They do shopping without walking. So they have different problems and they come up with different solutions while inhabiting the same type of environment. That's kind of the idea.
And Paco, just the fact that maybe we are so disconnected from nature in the way that we live in the last couple of
Yeah.
centuries at least or whatever. Just the fact that
Getting worse all the time.
getting worse and worse, absolutely. Just the fact that we are not able to understand the language of plants, so to speak, that doesn't mean they are not communicating, right? With
Oh,
not
well,
not not only with themselves, but even also with other species, even with us. I don't know. What's your views on
oh,
this?
certainly. I mean, well, with other species, that doesn't mean to say that they have got to communicate or to have an interest in us, because again, we are so arrogant. Homo sapiens as a species, we are so arrogant that we think that we are special, that we need to be there for some special reasons and some purpose. Sure, they've got to establish communication channels, right?
Mhm.
The phone is ringing, we'll leave it.
No problem.
But we just don't know uh, which messages, what type of vehicle they are using, for what purposes, and who is it the guys that they are interested in establishing a communication with. So when people speak about the language of plants, the chemical language of plants, of course, plants are emitting volatile compounds, round the clock, all sort of molecules, airborne traveling, sending messages, alert messages. Hey, things are going wrong. There's this caterpillar munching me over here. Watch out. Then you start to secrete toxins. So they get to communicate with one another and organize, their behavior collectively, because it's good for the society as such, right? So communication happens all over the place. Now, a different issue is that they might or not want to establish communication with a form of life that is completely irrelevant to them. So, put bluntly, a flower might be interested in communicating with this pollinator, but not with you playing music at home.
Mhm.
Because when I mention this, because when people talk about the music of the plants, or all these things, hey, should I play my plant, classical music or hard metal? They say, hold on a sec. The plant cares about the vibrations being produced by the pollinator. That's his mate, not you, right? So Communication takes place. Now, which is the type of messages that they are interested in or worthwhile communicating? That's a different issue.
I think it's a universe of a topic, the communication of in the plants and all this. Wow, that would take us another hour at least. But linking that with so communication and conscience, so they're sentient beings. You said in your conference, are they conscious?
Right. Okay. So red herring. First red flag. I certainly think they are. A different thing is what exactly that entails and how are you able to measure it or to gather the information that would point in that direction, right? So one disclaimer. One thing is intelligence, a different thing is sentience or consciousness, right? So I'm thinking of many gadgets we have at home, look like behaving really smartly, and then there is no mentality, no mental life whatsoever, right? So smart behavior doesn't correlate with consciousness, or it might, we don't know. But those are two different dimensions. So you can have very smart and zombie organisms. You can have very sentient creatures that might be very dumb things. Their behavior might be rather stupid and yet be sentient. You could have none of them, stupid and zombie, and you can have both, smart and full of mental life, right? So you can have everything. And this is an empirical question. And that means we cannot, on a priori grounds, solve the issue and respond to, hey, which are the guys on the tree of life? On the tree of life, at least, right? Or not, because doesn't mean to say that
we are getting there, Paco. We're getting there.
Little by little.
We are waiting for you.
But at least before we talk about AI, even just in biological forms of life, you might say, well, does communication entail that the organism in question that is establishing that communication channel is sentient, or could they communicate and yet be zombies, right? Parroting machines, right? And if you have a parroting machine, how do you know that it's just parroting? And at some point of complexity, sentience couldn't pop up, emerge, right? So if these are emergent properties, how do you know what's the dividing line at which point you cross the boundary and say, hey, now we have some emergent phenomena, right? So these are all, of course, really complex, vexing issues to solve. But to me, or at least what we try to do in our lab, we have now a couple of projects discussing sentience in plants. And what we are doing is something, in fact, is really easy. Is let's see how this discussion has been taken and pushed in the animal literature. Because if you think about it, and this applies both to plants, bacteria, and robots and AIs. Why? I mean, methodologically speaking, strategically speaking, the strategy is the following. Because if you think about it, the very same discussion has already taken place within the animal kingdom. So within the animal kingdom, we used to have like the privileged status. Hey, these are the sentient guys, Homo sapiens. Then, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, my dog is my pet, also feels. Then my cat, then my dolphin, then my elephant, whatever. So we get for these guys. And then we draw the dividing line within the animal kingdom. And they say, but of course, not a termite or not a snail or not a honeybee or not a fly or not, right? We have some, special care for vertebrates and think, well, an invertebrate, I mean, come on, is this fly going to be feeling, is a sentient being, whatever. Now, what's interesting about this discussion is that we can learn some lessons from it, which is when we've seen how this has been expanding, how animal researchers have been in the last couple of decades opening up the possibility or opening themselves to the possibility that these other lower animal life forms are sentient, why have they changed their minds? To see if we can change our minds with respect to AI, robotics, or plants in a similar manner. So they have changed their minds when they have realized that, hey, I thought these guys were exhibiting rather poor behavioral repertoires, so that the repertoire of behaviors was, nothing fanciful, just like, oh yeah, sure, imagine a plant. Oh yeah, sure, I know if I put my potted plant next to the windowsill, it will face towards the window because it's where the light is coming from. But then you say that's pretty much, like a pre-programmed routine. Is wired in their genes, right? Like, I mean, it's just a phototropic response. And then you go, if that was the case in the animal kingdom, right? Then you could go, okay, we have this animal form, like an invertebrate, doing something really routine-like, right? It's like a pre-programmed routine. And then you go and say, hey, you know what happens? That if I go and revisit this guy, I go and revisit this guy, I go and check it out again next day and the day after and the next month and in 2 years' time, then you start to get a fuller picture in which, oh, you know what? Its behavioral repertoire was way more sophisticated than initially thought. Because when you are making observations, it's just, really spotted observation, like, oh yeah, today 9 a.m. Okay, the guy is sitting there. Off I go for breakfast. Next day. And then when you have a trend, then you get to see, oh, they are doing things that are way more complex and more interesting, not just that their behavior is more complex, for example, with respect to light, but no, that they are responding to many, many, many different cues. And that means that they have to integrate them all. So I'm not just responding to light by growing phototropically if I'm a plant. I'm doing that whilst I'm also processing information related to, thermal gradients, chemical information, physical pressure, vibrations. So all sorts of information is impinging on my sensory surface. And that means that I cannot simply be a collection of gadgets that are pre-wired to respond on a one-to-one basis. I need to be integrating all these cues and providing a response that is adaptive at the global level, is globally adaptive, right? So when that picture starts to merge, then you start to see the fly or the snail or the termite with a different eye. You say, oh, these guys need to be thinking hard, need to be doing something, need to be positioning themselves to have, like, hey, oh,
They need to analyze and make a decision. No?
for example, right?
If I try to understand what you say, you're talking about two things. One is complexity, so the amount of inputs and combinations of inputs that produce certain reactions.
Well,
right?
Complexity is not complexity at the level of the processing of the information, which also could be the case, but complexity in the behavior itself.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
in how flexible, for example, how flexible that behavior can be. So the behavioral
the
pattern
number
can
of
change.
variables that get pulled into the equation, producing an almost infinite range of behaviors.
Right.
So that's one thing that I think you're interested. And the other thing is like I think it's what we call integrated information technology. It's like when it's not, I say, different sensors triggering it, but the integration of all the inputs and producing that. And then, it's funny because of it, if we go back, because I've been listening most of the time and see almost all of your sentences could have been spoken by someone who is claiming that we should be considering the possibility and the potentiality of machines or to be both intelligent or conscious. Like some are very stupid, like a sewing machine. But maybe they're not so stupid. They do plenty of things and they go wrong in many different ways, and they respond to many different treatments. So that's interesting. I think from our previous conversation, I'm going to draw from a previous conversation. The question is, what we are all subject to these similar pressures, and whatever in other places there is a trend to think that both intelligence and consciousness are almost necessarily biogenic.
Yeah, no, definitely. I see what you're getting at. I mean, I perfectly follow you. Look, I'm gonna be honest. That's a thought that has been at the back of my mind for some time now, but recently. I mean, I must confess that, once upon a time, that would had never crossed my mind, like the idea of artificial intelligence or sentience. I was like into the field of, hey, this is a property of life, right?
Yeah.
Actually, a couple of weeks ago, just before Easter break, I was giving a conference in Belgium and Holland, a couple of conferences, and I got them mixed up. I think it was in Holland. Some lady in the audience raised her hand and said something like, "But are you not following your line of thought? Are you not falling prey of the very same mistake you are complaining about, the animal-centric attitude? Are you not being biocentric
Yeah.
by default? And if you are complaining that why just animals, why not other life forms? Why do you need to be an animal? Why do you need to belong to the animal kingdom? Why do you need to belong to the tree of life? Right? And I absolutely get the point. But one thing is to understand the problem, and a different issue is how to get out of there. So what different solutions can we try out, right? So to me, the clear message is that we are being carbon-centric, right? So, and if you think about it, it's amazing because, yeah, sure. I mean, I was complaining that animal scientists are obsessed with animals or with mammals or with primates, and then I'd say, Paco, what's so special about carbon? Carbon-based life. Well, I mean, it's just an element of the periodic table. I mean, what's so special about carbon? You have so many different elements to pick from the periodic table. What's so special about carbon? How can you discard, how can you deny on a priori grounds the very possibility that sophisticated behaviors and even sentience can emerge from a different type of substrate, non-carbon based, right? So that's the point you're making, right?
Yeah, well, I was thinking because when you read the book is just after it came out, and I suppose when reading it would, this very thought that you're having for the last few weeks would have slightly changed the point of view with which you have analyzed some of the characters,
Right.
which is a big spoiler, will appear in the book.
Right.
But
yeah. No, I mean, to me, the problem is not to open it up to the possibility of artificial sentience or intelligence, which by the way, I'm open to, in the sense of open to exploring it.
Yeah.
Right. So exploring it with an open mind, while reminding ourselves that this an open empirical question. Right. Now, to me, what's the mistake? The mistake is to think that a form of intelligence or a form of sentience, biological or artificial, will be so insofar as it resembles us. That is, to me, the problem.
Yeah, for me that is a problem.
Right? So because I see that don't, please go.
No, I precisely, I think that one of the, some of the characters in the book, which just for literally to make it easy for the reader, they'll express themselves in human language,
right?
Which of course I don't think they would,
right?
But they have different machines that have evolved in different ways. Some of them to resemble and interact with humans. Are much more human-like because of the nature of the personal evolution, where other machines which have evolved in a completely different way, they talk to each other, say, "Oh, you're such a human," it's like, because they cannot relate to how they are, because although they know they share some common nature and recognize each other as automata, they say, well, but you're such a human. It's like,
Yeah,
because of course, and I think that's very important. You said whether a thing is conscience or sentience, it's got nothing to do whether their consciousness or sentience is like ours, or
sure,
like mammals,
sure.
or like animals, or like, and that poses the problem of the measurements, right? Isn't it? It's like how do we recognize how
How
do
do
we
you?
recognize sentience
Yeah,
or
yeah.
intelligence?
Well, clearly, I mean, the problem is that when this discussion is framed in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions, like what sort of conditions you have that are altogether sufficient and needed for a system to qualify as sentient or as intelligent, right? That's the mistake philosophers usually make, because they are obsessed with framing the discussion in terms of conditions of necessity and sufficiency. Because as soon as you do that, you are open to the possibility of thinking of a thought experiment, of a counterexample in which, hey, this guy has what is required and yet we wouldn't consider it intelligent, or hey, this other guy doesn't have this and yet we would intuitively consider it as right.
Yeah.
So you always start to find counterexamples that run both ways against the alleged set of condition of necessary and sufficient conditions. So this means that any conclusion we draw has always got to be understood very tentatively, very provisionally. So again, I go back to the idea of importing all these lessons from the discussion within the animal kingdom. When researchers nowadays say, hey, are flies or honeybees conscious? Then they go and say, okay, let's see. If they respond to anesthetics, you can anesthetize a honeybee. Well, that's interesting, because you might say, well, to me, the critical question, because we know that we can anesthetize a plant, we do it, right? But the point here is not that you can do it and that's it. That's something that you can explain physiologically, like the membrane properties of the cells. No, the interesting question is, what does it mean to come out of anesthesia, right? And here you have, because it means to recover something. What is it that you are recovering? Well, your subjective sense of awareness. Now you might say, oh, in an artificial system, it might make no sense to speak of anesthetizing it. Artificial systems, as we know them as of today. So that's another issue. When it is the AI of today or tomorrow's AI, or as we spoke before, in 2125, no? The AI of 2125, in 100 years' time, right? So, but regardless of what the future AI will bring or the future robotics will bring, the question is the fact that the response to anesthetics makes us suspect that the honeybee or the fly are sentient creatures nowadays doesn't mean to say that that same criterion is the criterion to be applied in other cases, because in the case of artificial potential sentience, that might not be the most relevant question. So again, you need to treat all these questions always with a grain of salt. Say, hey, let's just think that other criteria are the ones to be used. And why criteria might diverge? Because one thing that we keep forgetting is that if you want to go radical, the truth is that the one and only awareness that you are aware of is yours. So for you, Paco and Pablo might be zombies. A different question is, what sort of principles could we apply in terms of parsimony, in terms of, like rationality, to say, hey, what sense would it make for nature to just make one single individual of one species aware and the rest zombies? Makes no sense. But it makes no sense doesn't mean to say that you have the evidence. We don't have the evidence because there is a bridge in between the first person perspective and the third person perspective. And that's something you are never going to be able to cross. So my complaint is that when crossing from the first to the third person perspective, we are never it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in the shoes of those other species or of those other individuals, forgetting about ourselves. So how can you get rid of yourself as providing the gold standard and still retaining the idea of empathizing with those other forms of life? How can we develop empathy? How can we develop empathy without using ourselves as the measuring rod?
I would like to get a bit philosophical on that, because, for example,
But just a bit.
just a bit. No. It's you were saying on that, and I went traveling a little bit within those thoughts, because getting back again into the biocentric or anthropocentric, however you want to call it, we believe we are at the center of everything. Is like, could it be? Is there a chance that maybe we are in that leap of evolution, and we believe that we have done this artificial intelligence, the technological advances, and maybe that was a natural step into evolution, and that just because we don't understand what happens uh, in this new step, in these new AI systems, what goes inside them, how do they process all the information, and that we are not able to, maybe we don't have the ability to communicate with them, to understand that language, so to speak. That has happened. That's been known to happen in certain experiments. They've put a few AIs to talk between themselves. I believe Facebook and Google did this in 2017 or something like this. And after a few iterations, they changed the language that they were using. Yeah, they started with English, then they modified English, and then they had to shut it down because they didn't understand what the conversation was. Maybe we are in that point in which, I don't know if it's just a thought, not just a possibility.
That's an interesting question. You know why? Because this goes back to the idea of the environment or the world we inhabit. The world we inhabit is both non-linguistic and linguistic. So by speaking out, we are altering the linguistic environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way you learn your mother language has to do with that. So if you were exposed to different regularities, to different linguistic regularities, you would learn a different variety of your language, or you would learn a different language altogether. So, and as speakers keep uttering sentences out there, they are contributing to the alteration of those linguistic regularities, right? So now why do I say this? Because that's something that we've seen that happening in the evolution of languages. So think of a Creole language. So when you had, slaves being shipped to America a few centuries ago, right? They would just be taken to this island, and because they were mixed up, they would have like in this ship like all these slaves from this other place. They wouldn't share a common language, right? Coming from Africa, like this example of colonialism. They would be using the language of the colonizer. Could be Spanish, French, English, whatever, right? And eventually, you could see patterns of emergence, of stabilization, in which you could see a transition from a pidgin, which was this, pre-grammatical or agrammatical or mixture that they would be using, to a Creole, to a full-fledged language, right? So the shift from a pidgin to a Creole has to do with how the world they inhabit is being altered by interacting, communicating with one another, and closing the loop. So how those linguistic behaviors are at the same time altering the subsequent steps of behaving linguistically. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's something that applies equally to machines. The more bots chatting in cyberspace, the more this virtual environment is being changed and shaping in turn the way bots keep behaving. And that gives you different trends, different trajectories, and you can model that with evolutionary algorithms, and you can see, hey, which generations are going to behave in which particular linguistic environment, better or worse. So we can play all those games. You can model all those games both in terms of the linguistic and the non-linguistic environment
Only
different populations could inhabit.
You can model up
only
to
in
a
as
certain
much as
point,
we
no?
can model. Sorry, or only in as much as we can model the participants of the games, but of course the complexity of the current systems are absolutely outside the capability of. I mean, only AI could be modeling smaller AIs, but no one could be modeling the top level AIs.
Sure,
I mean,
sure,
because
The
they can't. I
escape,
mean,
escape
they don't have the
velocity.
computer power to model it.
sure. But this is I'm not worried about the computational capacities, the information processing capacities itself. I mean, you can think of a future scenario in which you have quantum computing and you have new processors and you have new, amazing speed of processing. There is still something that has to do not with the information processing as such, but with the behavior itself. So with the, that's when we speak in cognitive science, we speak of embodied, embedded, enactive, extended cognition. We are speaking of things that are extraneural. So that don't have to do with the actual information being
Yes, but the environment.
yeah.
But
But the environment.
there may be behavior in the way that information is processed internally, anyways. No.
Mm.
So and that behavior may be different and maybe much more complex.
No, so definitely. So what I mean to say is that you can have the fact that you have more computational power by itself doesn't guarantee that you're gonna end up with smarter guys.
No.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you can have very
There is
smart guys.
No, my point with that is that
I
the
mean, I'm
fact
thinking of,
that's evolving so much and that it's escaped from our ability to grasp it or to model it, we are not going to be able to see and to analyze and to decide whether there's some behavior
oh,
going on.
that's already happening.
Exactly.
I mean that's already happening. As of today, they deliver the goods
You
you
don't know
wanted them
how.
to deliver. A different issue is what sort of partitionings in their hidden hypercube of their neural network are they using? How is information being structured? But they are a neural network is just a function approximator. It just approximates two domains, an input and an output domain. And in between, shit can happen. And we don't know what sort of shit is happening
Mhm.
because
Well, it's pretty much humans are an input to output approximation, function.
yeah,
We are
yeah,
not very
yeah,
different.
yeah.
Listen, before, because I see time is running and there is another topic we want to
Okay.
dive in, and Pablo will bring you. I just want to just quote something from the book, which I think is pretty relevant. At one point, there is two characters that travel all the time together: the loner, El Solitario, and his fellow mate is Olo. And they're traveling around, and Olo, the machine, laughs at him. You see, you poor human. The difference between you and me is that I can resolve my own equation of consciousness, whereas you cannot. So I can model you and understand you and understand why you're conscious in the hypothesis that this is modelable, right? And I can model me and I know why I'm unconscious, but you're not. So you can always believe I'm a machine. I am just a machine, whereas I know who I am, but you will never. And that's a pretty poetic way of putting it. When, of course, because to make all these calculations, we would need computers. Like to make all the analysis, we would need computers. Whereas computers will not need us to understand consciousness if they get the model right. If they is like, yes, well, I know who's conscious. You don't.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I don't know. I don't know how much you can push that hunch because I mean I can
It's
hear you.
fiction. It's
Yeah, sure,
fiction.
sure, 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 sure,
It's
sure, sure.
fiction.
Yeah, yeah. No, but what's interesting, what I mean to say is that here we might be using computers with two different meanings. So when you say a human will need a computer, but the computer won't need the human, and just the computer will need computer uno sub one
Yeah.
will need computer sub two.
Yeah.
Don't call it a human, but you will need some scaffolding.
Yes, yes, and hierarchies and everything. I mean, it's just it's like a strike of color in a white canvas. What
Right.
I've just done. I mean, of course, it's just splash
Sure.
of color.
Sure.
We don't
Okay.
know. And what you're saying,
Okay, I'm gonna say something wild. Okay.
cool.
Okay. Okay. Maybe the problem with both the computer and the human is that we are never able, or we resist getting rid of the I. When you say I won't need the human, right? There is not an I, and yet you can be talking about sentience. So sentience doesn't require an I, as in the sense of boundary contained. Um, think of Gaia theory, right? So the whole system is the one and only sentient system, and we are all bits and parts of it, right? If that applies to, just a thought, if that applies to artificial intelligence, imagine you have a universe of zeros and ones, so to speak, right? We are not here, they don't need us, we don't provide any gold standard, they are doing great. They might be doing great and yet inhabit a virtual world in which the one and only level of sentience that is the genuine sentience is the one at the level of their own Gaia. So they are individuals that are only parts that serve a better purpose.
Totally.
The emergent subjective awareness of that collectivity as such. And then those robots, those computers, those bots become simply organelles within a bigger artificial cell, right?
I think this is a beautiful place
It's beautiful.
to move on to the next topic, isn't it, Paolo?
Yeah. So okay, the big topic as well, the big question, linking with all of this, immortality. Do you think that
An easy
maybe in the
topic to end up
future
with.
is it gonna be like, are we the Ptolemies or today's era as well with this?
I was misunderstanding you. I thought you meant immortality in a different sense. So you mean if we're gonna have enough progress in the biosciences to stretch life, to have a longer lifespan, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's easier. Good. I think we can see that on a daily basis, right? That's something that is being tackled from multiple angles, right? I mean, think of your grandparents, what they looked like when they were in their 70s. And today you see people in their 70s jogging around the city, right? I mean, we are stretching it without realizing how much we are achieving already, because that doesn't just have to do with bioengineering. It has to do with many other things, with habits, with many other things. Now, if you mean to say in the more radical sense that, we are not simply going to live 120 years, we are going to live 500 years or 1,000 years. If that's the type of scenario you're envisaging, we can just have good guesses, right? Now, my guess is that there is some. My guess is that we will only be able to tackle that by approaching the issue from a different perspective. And by this, what I mean to say is that today's best, science against aging is being done from a reductionist perspective. As if, hey, you go to the molecules, you understand what's happening here. Oh, you want your telomeres to stay longer? Okay, what do we do at the molecular level? You want this to happen? What do we do at so we have a cartoon or toy understanding of how biology sticks things together, and we think that we can be looking at the building blocks, and by taking care of the building blocks, we're going to have the wall in place. I think that's the wrong attitude. I think that we need to take a holistic approach, an emergentist approach against, a mechanistic or a reductionist understanding. Take the very idea that there is some very good work being done in this. I'm thinking of working in Mike Levin's lab in the US and some others where you say, hold on a sec. I mean, this is not, we are not gonna tweak it. We are not gonna fool our limits by tweaking, DNA. This is something that belongs to the collectivity. Well, that takes you back to the idea of bioelectricity, for example. How can you tweak the behavior of an organism by playing globally, right? With, for example, electromagnetic patterns. So I think that unless we combine both the knowledge of the structure at the molecular level and this other more holistic or emergentist perspective, we are going to be doomed, because life, the secret of life, lies elsewhere and not simply in conserving, in keeping the building blocks. Put it this way, it has to do with relational properties, not intrinsic properties. The intrinsic properties of each building block won't take you there, because these are relational properties. Those are the ones that count.
But is it like those relationships that are, which like the environment, the external environment, is affecting your building blocks, your building rocks, like your DNA? We know that we have events that act on the DNA level, and that triggers diseases, or most of diseases. So couldn't we somehow prepare the DNA, or in a molecular level, so that they are sort of armored against those external events, and we could prevent it that way?
I see what you mean, but that's not the issue in itself, because shit will keep happening along the way. So this is an arms race. So something happens, you do something to solve it. Something else will happen, you will do something to solve it. Something else. So different types of shit will keep happening, and you will need to keep making adjustments, tweaking. So the point, more generally speaking, right, is that whatever life boils down to is not taking your car and changing one piece of gear for another, because, hey, swap this for this. Okay, the car goes and keeps running. That happens. That's plumbing. I mean, medicine is a lot about plumbing, right? So organ transplant, or check this out, or put this in place, whatever. But that type of plumbing doesn't take you there. I'm not saying it's not important. If I need a kidney or a heart transplant, I'm happy to get a new kidney or a new heart. That's not the point. That's something else. So that's the mechanistic aspect of the preservation of life. We are talking about the information, right? So can your thoughts, can Paco's idea of having a self be stretched beyond his physical dementia? I mean, that's what I take is
super interesting thought, super interesting answer. I would like, though, minding the time, I would like, because this question we ask everyone. Okay, let's take a wild guess, if you will. What do you think we will achieve that in the future? And would you want to be immortal if you were given the chance to?
no. I have my absolutely certain answer is no. I would definitely not want to. You know why?
I would love to.
Because I wouldn't appreciate today's sunset. I have so many other sunsets in the future that I wouldn't give a shit about missing today's. I want to appreciate today's because it might be the last one. And that type of joy will be missed.
Well, that's quite the difference between mortals and immortals in the novel, isn't it? Like, I think exactly that defines the different types of behaviors. Anyway, yeah, it was lovely. Lovely talking to you, Paco.
Well, no, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thanks a million. Thanks a million. I think it's been quite an interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too,
Yeah, sure.
and I hope people enjoyed it as well. I want to mention, if they want to get your book, Planta Sapiens, for their mind already, they can do it in different platforms. Like to mention which, or what's the easiest way to get
Oh,
it?
anywhere. I mean, it's the book came out in 2022 in English in the UK first, then in the States with Norton, and then it's been translated to all major languages, and it's basically everywhere. I mean, people who buy online, they can find it in any book online platform. We know them. We don't need to name them. But if you look
Planta
to your
Sapiens is the name of the book. Just
yeah,
to
it's Planta Sapiens, like
Planta
Homo
Sapiens.
sapiens, Planta Sapiens.
Yeah.
But you can find it in any local bookshop, or I mean, people will find it if they just Google them. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that, and I hope people enjoy the reading if they get to read it.
For sure.
Oh, it's a
for sure.
lovely book. I did really enjoy it. So thank you for that again as well.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks a million, Paco. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.